Okay, as a landlord, I think the best words that you can put in a clause are that the tenant is responsible for their own maintenance. I bring this up and I put this as my top tip in this video because I think a lot of people have a fear around having tenants or having properties because they think there's going to be some midnight call where the plumbing is exploding. They don't want to deal with it. Well, this sentence in the lease helps negate that. It puts the responsibility onto the tenant so that you don't have to go and deal with it. Now, I have some limitations in my lease about this, so I only let a tenant do it one time without contacting me first if they're staying for like 2 or 3 months. And hypothetically, on our properties, we also charge the tenants 10% for the maintenance. To be honest with you, the last tenants that we had, the tenants that we have installed at the moment, but the last ones we sourced, they pushed against this and we were totally okay with it and we stripped it out for a couple of reasons, because they were staying for 18 months. Now, I know this is a video about leasing in the midterm space, and typically you would think someone that's coming for a year or more is not a midterm tenant, they're a long-term tenant. But the reality is a midterm tenant is anyone that stays for 30 days or more and they want their place furnished. And you will be surprised, there are a lot more people that want it for 6 months, a year, 18 months than you would initially think. I was incentivized to give these guys a little bit of a break because they were going to come in for 18 months and they were great tenants. So I pulled that out. The other reason why I pulled it out is because I actually don't mind paying that 10% up front. The reason for the 10% is so that the tenant has a little bit of skin in the game as well. So they're not just scheduling anything and everything at all times. But the reality is what I really care about is not having to play telephone between the tenant, the vendor that's going to provide the service, and then going back to the tenant. So that game of telephone is what really doesn't appeal to me. That said, some of my consulting clients, quite a few of my consulting clients, are worried about this. So the way to handle that, if you don't want to put the 10% in, is to just provide them with a list of vendors that they can only call from. Thank you for joining me today. For this video, we are going to talk about my top 5 tips for a midterm lease. I have this older video about 10 tips for a lease. It is worth checking out, but it's a few years old and a few things have changed since then. Also, the lease that I'm referring to in this video is my lease. I am more than happy to give it to you. Just email me. My email is on the screen. One thing to note though is that if you are in a different city and state, so if you're outside of Colorado Springs, Colorado, you should be looking at your own local city and state laws. And in a few minutes in this video, I will tell you how to pull a free lease for your city and state. There's a lot of benefit to this. So I am happy to share mine if you just want to look at the language that I use and some of the stuff I bake in. But just know you should also pull the free ones so that you are fully protected where you're at. Why should you listen to me today? Well, I've written 3 books in this space. They're available on Amazon. They're all about midterm rentals. That's reason number 1. Number 2, I've been doing this since 2017. Number 3, I have a 92% occupancy rate, meaning that my rentals are full 92% of the time. And number 4, I typically get anywhere between 45 to 60% higher than long-term unfurnished. And that is another reason to love midterm rentals, is that you tend to get this elevated rent, the people stay longer, and if you do it right, you can really close the gaps between the stays. Tip number 2, let's talk about platforms and how the lease works in the different platforms. You need to be on 2 of the following 3 platforms. You certainly could be on all 3 platforms if you wanted to be, but I don't think it's necessary. But 2 out of these 3 platforms being Airbnb, Furnished Finder, and Zillow Rental Manager. And most people don't associate Zillow Rental Manager with this space. They think of it as more of a long-term unfurnished space, which it has been traditionally. But in my experience, I have found that when you put up a property that is furnished and available to people longer, they will jump on it. So I really like Zillow, and I think it actually converts quite well. So let's talk about Airbnb. They are a little bit different beast, but they are a huge beast with major market domination. And so for that reason, I think to have success in the midterm space, you need to be on Airbnb. At the very least, you will save yourself a lot of time and headache by being on Airbnb. Okay, so the way that Airbnb is different is that Airbnb, you don't take a lease or a deposit. Airbnb technically will allow you to put a lease in the house rules, but I don't like that because if something goes wrong, they're going to shoot you back to that lease. Whereas just the nature of being on Airbnb, you have access to Airbnb cover. My suspicion is that if you put a lease in there, they are going to say all issues need to be worked out through that lease versus Airbnb cover. And Airbnb cover will cover you up to $3 million in damages and up to $1 million in liability. Airbnb is more motivated to protect you as the host, to protect their reputation, if nothing else, more so than your insurance is. So that's Airbnb. Now let's talk about Zillow and Furnished Finder. Zillow and Furnished Finder do not have any kind of protections baked in, but what they do have are tools inside the platform where you can pull a lease, you can background and credit check people, you can have digital signatures on the lease. It is called Key Check in Furnished Finder, and then in Zillow, it's just inside Zillow Rental Manager. Both products are free to the host, which is great news. And I really recommend pulling leases out of Furnished Finder or Zillow. You don't need to do both, but you need to do one or the other. And the benefit to it, the reason why I'm making this recommendation, is because they'll teach you things. So again, I'm a real estate agent. I work mostly with investor clients, and then I'm a consultant in the midterm space, meaning I build people's listings for them on Airbnb, Furnished Finder, and Zillow. And I also study the rules, and I have my own midterm rentals, and I still felt like I learned something from pulling the lease. It doesn't take long and it won't cost you anything, and then you have a lease if you want to use it in the future. Before I get to tip number 3, if you feel like you are learning something, please like this video. If you are thinking about pursuing self-property management and or you have 10 or fewer properties, that is classified as a small investor in the United States, and you want more information on that, subscribe, because that's pretty much who all these videos are directed at, are people that aren't looking to own 100 doors or 1,000 doors. They are looking to diversify their assets. They just want to be more financially stable, and real estate is one of the tools they're using. If that's you, these videos are made for you. All right, let's get into tip number 3. It is the right to inspect in the lease. The reason why I am bringing this up is because more and more from my consulting clients, I am hearing, should I have a cleaner come into the property? I am nervous about the tenants. I want to get eyes on the tenants. I think it would be really nice to provide a cleaning service. I don't think most of you think it would be really nice to provide a cleaning service. I think that you want someone in there looking at the property, and you potentially want to be in the property as well. I completely understand this, but I do not like the cleaning service for 2 reasons. The first is that you're talking about bringing someone in that I've never met that's going to be around my property, and I have no recourse if something goes wrong. Alternately, sometimes I can be a bit of an introvert, and I don't necessarily want to feel the obligation to be home and or make small talk with the cleaner when they're there. So that's reason 1 why I don't like it. Reason two is that I feel like I'm a fairly clean person, and ultimately that cost is going to get passed on to me when I don't need it. Now, this clause is saying you can go into the property. For us, we give our tenants 24 hours notice. I think this is a nice courtesy. It gives them plenty of time, and then I get eyes on the property. And if I wanted to, I could do it every single day, every week, every month. I don't want to do this. I want to trust my tenants so that I don't feel like this is an issue. But I did get burned this summer with a long-term tenant. And having had that experience, I would, for tenants that are on the line, I would put this into a lease going forward. And what I mean by on the line is the tenants we had this summer, there was a question about their credit and their history, but we wanted to give them a chance, and I want to continue to give people the chance. I don't want to limit somebody's access to housing just because they made a financial mistake when they were 18 or they haven't had perfect credit. But I also still want to protect myself. So if I had a tenant in the future that was questionable, like my summer tenants, I would have a cleaner come in every month, and I would pass that cost on to them. But again, I'm not worried about that with a tenant either from Airbnb or elsewhere that has a really solid track record of being a responsible tenant. I don't assume they're going to change their behavior when they get to my property, but instead of hiring a cleaner, you can just exercise this right and be in there. If you want to maintain legal costs, so in the clause, it is written in that the winner, the prevailing winner of some kind of dispute, will have their attorney's fees covered by someone else. Benefit of this clause is that if you get taken to court just because someone disagrees with you and they don't have a case, and or unfortunately what we see in the US is a lot of financial blackmail, because it's like, hey, I'm going to threaten you with a lawsuit so that I get my way. This helps protect you from that, because if they take you to court and it's stupid, they're going to have to pay for it. And so therefore they're not inclined to take you to court or to make that threat. And I feel like this protects both the landlord and the tenant, so I really like it for that reason. Okay, fifth and final tip for the midterm lease is the deposit. So when you're in the long-term space, it is traditional that the deposit equals 1 month's rent. But for some reason, people do not like this in the midterm space. But I do not care. Again, if I'm on Airbnb, I'm not worried about the deposit. On Zillow and Furnished Finder, we would not, and we never have, let anyone in without getting a deposit equal to 1 month's rent. I think it's a mistake to not require 1 month's deposit, and the reason for that is long term, they're making you require 1 month's deposit because your walls are vulnerable. So the house is vulnerable, but everything, all the furniture that's being brought in is theirs. In this case, the walls are vulnerable, but so is the furniture. And currently there isn't a great insurance product to protect you. So insurance was very slow for a long time on insuring short terms. They understood how to do long terms, but it took them a while to catch up on short terms. And now we have decent short term products, but we still don't have very good midterm products. There's often a gap for insurance coverage for people that are renting from 30 days to 6 months. If you're renting for fewer than 30 days or for longer than 6 months, you are typically covered, but the kind of in between is a little bit awkward and the insurance products aren't great for it. Your deposit is really your best recourse. And in our case, luckily, we had time and a half as the deposit. That was the protection that we put in for these questionable tenants. Instead of having a cleaner, we had a much higher deposit, and it did help us quite a bit. Okay, so those are my top 5 tips for the midterm space. I'm gonna link to a video about Zillow just because, again, I think it's a really good resource and a really good opportunity for people in the midterm space.